Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Knowledge. Now, you may recognise my guest I've got alongside me on screen. We have asked back Sarah Ormerod from Thrive Nutrition. Sarah, great to see you. We had you here previously for our Insight series talking about general fueling for athletes, but today we're going to dig in to something which is it's come up quite a lot with me, with athletes that I work with, and it's something that definitely needs addressed, and it is the difference in nutritional needs between, well, mainly for women, because they literally are not just small men. So our relationship has obviously grown loads over the last time we spoke. You've now got 2 or 3 of my athletes working with you, and you've got 3 female athletes working, and the stuff that you've been doing in the background has been absolutely brilliant. The word game changing kind of gets thrown around quite a lot, but they have noticed a huge marked improvement in their recovery and their understanding of why they're feeling how they're feeling at certain points during a month of training, when they have their cycle, all that sort of stuff. So we're going to dig into that quite a lot today. But first and foremost, Sarah, how have you been?
I've been very well, yeah. As we were just chatting there, things have actually been pretty busy for me. So nutrition-wise, it's kind of been business as usual, really, just doing all of consultations via Zoom. So that's been going pretty well. A bit of writing work for some sports magazines, and then I've also got my other hat, my marketing side of things, which has been keeping me busy as well. So yeah, and just getting out training, running in the hills when I can, making the most of the nice weather. So yeah, all good.
At the weekend, I was very envious of you. You're in the lakes, just enjoying some running in the mountains, which looked absolutely glorious. Well, the rest of us have been sweating like lunatics up here in Scotland. You've been living the
Definitely sweating in the lakes as well. It was roasting hot there, but nice weather for the hills. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Let's dive into this then, Sarah. So, women's nutritional needs, how are they different compared to men's needs?
Okay, so I guess probably a good place to start is for a long time, and the way I like to work as a nutritional therapist is generally the guidance that I put together for my clients and for athletes. I like that to be based on evidence, so you know that the advice that you're giving people is sound. The trouble with sports nutrition, generally speaking, is historically most of the research that has been done in the field of sports nutrition has been done with men, samples of men. So then obviously for a long time, all of the guidance that people are following, in terms of macronutrient needs, for fueling, for general health and well-being, is predominantly based on studies with men and not with women. And I guess the reason for that is actually a fairly sensible reason, is the fact that females have a menstrual cycle, which actually then makes it very difficult to do research, because you obviously need a representative sample of people who are all at exactly the same time in their cycle, have the same level of hormones, and actually that's a very difficult thing to try and do with women. Everyone's going to be at a different point in their cycle. Their hormones are going to be at different levels. So it makes it difficult to do research, which then means that that women obviously have different needs because they have a menstrual cycle. So we'll probably get into that a little bit shortly. But because of that menstrual cycle and the hormones, predominantly estrogen and progesterone with women, they have different needs at different times of the month. And obviously you can't kind of extrapolate research or findings that has been done with men and apply that to women, because they're a different makeup, a different beast. So, and then obviously with the menstrual cycle for females comes other things as well, other considerations which you may have at points with your athletes. So pregnancy, menopause, and all of these things that are associated with the menstrual cycle at different points in a woman's life, and all of those factors will play a part in terms of their needs at those points in their life will change. So it's pretty complex, but I can hopefully break that down a little bit today.
Yeah, it does sound incredibly complex. And I think was it Stacy Sims that came up with the whole "women are not small men" thing, and she was part of that the osmo nutrition thing, wasn't she? About the osmolality of blood, which is your plasma to liquid in your bloodstream, and how that changes obviously for women at different times of the month, and that obviously has a big massive change to potentially what happens from a cardiac point of view, as well as obviously energy as well. But there's also been things, I think she also coined terms that like the menstrual cycle, and when you have your menstrual cycle, it can almost be like a superpower as well. When your body is in such heightened alert that it actually performs way better than you actually realize that it can.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Stacey Sims is a really interesting person to look up. She's got a couple of books, but she also does a lot of TED Talks, which you can access online if you're interested. They're definitely worth a watch. But the thing about it being actually, she talks about it being like an ergonomic aid, is actually for women, is if they are in tune with their cycle and they understand how it works, and at each point in their cycle what their needs are and how their body is different at that time, then you can play it to your advantage. So I can kind of talk through what a standard female menstrual cycle would be like and what that might involve. But I think the key thing there is, as it stands when it comes to research, from what I know myself, or what I've read, is we're still really struggling to find, for that reason I was saying, in terms of research with women, it's very difficult to find research which says, okay, this is the approach that you should take with women, because every woman is different. So the best thing to do as a female or as a coach with athletes would be to encourage the athlete to track their cycle and their progress in their training throughout their cycle. And then you can start to understand, if you have an understanding of the cycle and how it works, at what point you should be doing more endurance-based exercise. When is it better to do higher intensity work? And what are your nutrition requirements at that time to support that effort? So yeah, that would probably be the biggest takeaway, I would say.
I think even having that now explained to a lot of people who are watching this, they'll be like, this now it's almost like a light bulb moment where they go, hang on a minute here, I've just been, we're creatures of habit, so we generally tend to eat the same thing at the same time of day, irrespective of what our training volume is, the intensity of our training is. And sometimes you just put it down to having just a bad day, but it sounds like what you're saying there, if we can dig in and the research and the testing can be, the issue is the consistency by the sounds of it, and having all the markers in the right place. But if you can get on top of that, it then means that there's less of a chance of you having those bad days, potentially if it's an event you're at, or if you're in like a really heavy block of training, and unfortunately your cycle does happen to be part of that. It's great for the coach to understand why, but more importantly for the athlete to understand why you're feeling just really rubbish today, or why you felt really great the other day. So I think it definitely opens up that the Pandora's box of the complexity of what we're actually dealing with. But I understand that there's a lot of things you've got to look at. Obviously, there's the hormonal balance, there's when the cycle is, but also things like the oral contraceptive as well. That is, a bearing on all these things. And we hear all these other terms like Red S and all that sort of stuff floating around. I know that Evie Richards, a very well-known Red Bull athlete, rides for Trek Factory Racing, multiple world cyclocross champion, and now doing her bit in the XCO. She has recently just got through Red S. So that's something which has obviously it's very well highlighted that is actually a real thing, and that it is actually causing athletes issues. But going back to hormonally, the cycle, the oral contraceptive pill and Red S, for those people who are tuning in, what is actually happening from the hormonal point of view, and how does the contraceptive pill play a part in that, and how can it aid or not help it?
Okay, so I guess at the most basic level, every female should naturally have a menstrual cycle. So that will vary from person to person. Usually it will be within the region of like 21 to 40 days, but 28 days is the length of a standard natural cycle. The trouble with the contraceptive pill, and I personally, I was on it for about 20 years, and then I stopped taking it, and I actually took a while to get my periods back because I was training really heavily at the time in triathlon. So I have that kind of understanding from personal experience as well as, you know, the people that I work with. But when you take the oral contraceptive pill, it's you're not having, when you're having a bleed, if you're on the mini pill, it's not a real period. So it's masking symptoms that could be, you know, going on behind the scenes. So you're maybe thinking that you're having a period, but for example, which is why the oral contraceptive pill, when it comes to Red S, would be contraindicated if you were to go and see a specialist. They would encourage you to come off it because it then helps you to understand naturally what's happening with your body and your cycle. You might not be having periods. And there's various different things that happen with that. But with Red S, there's lots of research, which papers and things that I can share with you, Jimmy, you know, if you want to share them. But generally, it's due to low energy availability. And the impact that has on the different systems in the body. So if you're not taking in enough energy to sustain the activity that you're asking your body to do, whatever your sport is, your body's always going to prioritize movement over anything else. So then what can happen is other systems in the body, like, you know, your hormone balance, your menstrual cycle, your digestion, your immune system, they can be affected or compromised because there's not enough energy for them to operate effectively. So that's why it's a useful thing for females to have a natural cycle and to understand, to track that and to have an understanding of what's going on with their body. Because as we were saying at the beginning, if you can do that, actually you can use that to your advantage. And also it's a really healthy thing. So what I would say is if females are not having periods, which there's lots of talk about, for, you know, it's not something that people talk about, but actually if you're not having periods, then it needs to be investigated, and you should be going to your GP to find out why. And if you're on the oral contraceptive pill and you're doing heavy training and you have other symptoms like, you know, you're maybe getting lots of injuries, stress fractures, you're getting sick really regularly, your digestion's not great, then all of those are indicators or signs that there might be something underlying going on. So that's when you would maybe think, okay, well, actually, how much is this person eating? You dig a little bit deeper and try and find out what's going on, and probably refer to a specialist in that area.
Wow. So Red S, then, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, Sarah, can you kind of wrap it up in a nice nutshell, please?
Yeah, so as I was talking about energy availability, so the definition of that is relative energy deficiency in sport. And prior to Red S, it was previously known as the female athlete triad. So that was a term, it was only really applicable in research with females in the past. So that would be in the case when females have amenorrhea, so they're not having a period, and as a result of that, they've got low estrogen. It can then affect bone density, so you're more susceptible to things like stress fractures. But now, a lot of research has been done with males and females. Interestingly, papers out recently on male cyclists who do endurance cycling. So it's obviously a non-weight bearing sport. You're on a bike, but also it's high, potentially if you come off, it's high impact. And at that point, then you can have fractures or breaks and things like that. And then you discover that bone density is maybe not there. So relative energy deficiency in sports. So you're it can be intentional or non-intentional. intentional is when there's maybe issues with restricting. So, you know, people who have disordered eating patterns, and they're doing that intentionally for whatever reason, or unintentional, where you have your classic kind of like weekend warriors or people who train really hard. They maybe have, you know, a full-time job, a family, they're doing all of these other things, and they're just not taking in unintentionally enough energy for their sport. And then, you know, then that's that they might start getting injured, and get into that cycle of illness and injury and wonder what's going on. So
that shines the torch very, very brightly on what has always been an issue within sport at any kind of, you know, high amateur to professional level, is that the relationship with food, it's very, very black and white. I eat an awful lot today and I don't eat anything tomorrow. But what you should actually be doing is having the conversation with your coach and understanding why some days, which is exactly what you said there when it comes to the cycle as well for women, is that there are going to be some days, depending on what you're doing training wise, you're going to have to eat more maybe than you're comfortable with. And understanding why you have to do that is really a key part of that, because you're not just eating because you're being a greedy so-and-so, you're eating because there's a lot going on in the background. You're trying to keep your hormonal balance in the right place and keep it in check, but you're also making sure you've got enough energy and you're not deficient in that energy for your sport, hence red. Yeah. So for me is that this isn't just a women only situation. I deal with a lot of people who don't understand that before they've got a really intense session, whether it's on Zwift or it's a really intense session before they go out on the road or a mountain bike or whatever they're doing, that 90 minutes to 1 hour before, they need to be up to their eyeballs in carbs. If it's a high intense or even hefty sweet spot or above sort of tempo, even long runs with intervals, you need to make sure you got the fuel in that engine. And people, the analogy for me is always, you are whenever you're doing any kind of sport and you're giving it full pelt, you're a Formula One car. Simple as that. Although you might not think you're the best in the world or you're not aiming to break a world record, it all comes down to the same brass tacks. You need the fuel inside, you need the carbohydrate, which is your gasoline or your diesel or whatever. You need the water like a car does, and you need oil in there as well. So you need all three of those things. And if one of them isn't there, there's going to be a hole appearing in your engine and you're going to start leaking energy left, right and centre. We do that automatically by the way in which in order to make power, as we measure in cycling, or get pace when you run, you need to expend energy, and you can't do that if there ain't no energy there in the first place. So trying to explain that to athletes and get them to understand that every day for training isn't necessarily the same for fuel. And we spoke about that at length last time in Finlay, and I have picked up on that quite a few times again off the back of our previous conversation we had a few months ago. But if we do have athletes or people who are watching and they're actually, a lot of this is resonating with them, they're maybe having stress fractures, they're maybe noticing there's maybe a little bit potentially, would bruising be something that would kind of like bruising around about joints or just random bruises on your arms or your legs? Would that also be a sign that there's something going on as well?
With bruising, I guess I would be thinking about iron and immune response. So low iron, low ferritin. But yeah, potentially. I think what you just said there is quite interesting about what you were, as you would yourself in Finlay, when you're talking to your athletes about their session in the same way that every session has a purpose. You're not going into a session to it's nice to if you're training, it's an easy session. There's a reason why you're doing that easy session, or it's an interval session or an endurance workout, and actually alongside the purpose for that session, there's an appropriate fueling strategy that aligns with that need. And I think it's just trying to educate and help people to understand what those rules of thumb are, and then try and test that with themselves to find out what works for them. Because it's not a one size fits all approach. Everybody is different, but as a rule of thumb, even if you are you're playing around with training low or low carb on zone 1 to 2 efforts, you still need carbohydrate in your diet to put back in what you've used. And when you start completely restricting major food groups like that, that's kind of, if you're doing a lot of training, when you can potentially get into that grey area where you're more susceptible to these kinds of issues.
Yeah, we touched on it previously again in a chat we were talking about. We're not only working on changing people's physiology, we're also trying to tap into making their energy systems better. And every targets a specific energy system. And again, it goes back to, if you are doing a steady away ride, you can get away with being minimal carbs. If you're doing a high intense exercise, whether it's a 4-hour classic race or a marathon or whatever, you're in high burn, and you need to make sure that it's there. And you also need to make sure that when you're doing it, you're putting it back in as well, because you rifle through calories through respiration, from heat, all these things, just general movement, all those things. And that's not even taken into what's happening on a cellular level from the fact that you're actually burning to create the energy. So there's loads more to it. And it's really, really key that, that's identified between what the sessions are and what the rationale is behind them, and why that energy system needs work depending on the event that you're doing. And it's our job, like what we're doing right now, is to try and help inform people why that would look different. So as I said, we kind of jumped off topic a wee bit, as we do, but that's all good.
Totally.
If someone does come and see having symptoms like that, they are having these stress fractures, and they're not having a cycle, etc., what's the first bit of advice you would give them, Sarah? Would it be straight to the doctor?
Well, if they were having stress fractures, and they're probably going to be seeing a physio or the GP, or they'd probably be talking to some sort of a specialist anyway. From what I find is quite useful, if I have a new client, just to see where they are, is to actually look at doing like a blood panel, where you look at different biomarkers to get a full picture of where that person is. So you're looking at everything there from your different hormone levels in the body, cortisol, vitamin D, iron, ferritin, inflammatory markers, and then you get a really good picture of where that person is at. If I thought that somebody was kind of a classic case of Red S, I have a good understanding of what's going on there, but it would really depend on if I thought that there was, when I was talking about that intentional or unintentional Red S. If there was an intentional Red S case there, where it was someone who maybe had disordered eating patterns, I would probably be looking to refer them on to a specialist, or someone who has a lot of experience in that area, because you're looking at food and what they're taking in and making sure that that's enough, but there's a lot more at play there psychologically. So there's a clinical sports dietitian called Renee McGregor, who's really well renowned in this area, and she does a lot with disordered eating. She's got a clinical background in that area, and she does a lot on Red S. So I would probably be looking to refer on to somebody like that in that case, and then they can kind of do a thorough assessment and put together a plan for how you move forward. But I think the blood work is always a good place to start, and you kind of have a really good picture there when you're starting out with somebody and putting a plan in place for recovery and getting to a better place. If you retest again in 3 months or 6 months time, you can retest those biomarkers and see how things have moved on, and I think that's really useful.
We see it quite a lot of these companies. I think you've got Thriva, you've got a few other ones, but I know there's one up here. Is it Forth? I think that's the one that you use.
Yeah,
they're close to us in the middle of Scotland, aren't they?
I'm not sure where they're based, but yeah, Fourth Edge are a great company. I do work with them. I have a kind of affiliate partnership with them where you can test different biomarkers, and they've got certain tailored tests for different types of athlete depending on your sport. So runner, triathlete or cyclist, or you can kind of build your own blood panel based on the biomarkers that you want to test. So it's quite useful. You get an online an app where you can log on and see your results, and I would also review them so that I can work with the client to develop an appropriate plan. So it's quite good.
That was a company actually we spoke to when I first started Meta. We spoke to them about 3 years. We never done anything about it because we were never in a position to, and I think the science was still pretty much building. It's the data sets were building as we were speaking to them. But I think now it's definitely something, along with like what you're doing, affiliation with that sort of thing is probably not a bad idea from our point of view. But again, it goes back to, no matter how much we talk about here, we're trying to get more about the awareness of it rather than trying to give people answers of how to fix it. There are avenues you can go down. First one is GP. Second one is look at what you're eating first and foremost. The other one is obviously blood markers as well. So there's a few ways in which you can get some relatively quick answers to why you're feeling and what's actually happening, you know, from that kind of hormonal point of view, etc., etc. It's very evident during this chat that it is incredible, and it's ridiculous to say this because we are all different, but it is incredibly dependent on the individual, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose that goes back to, you know, what we're talking about, you know, if we're talking about females specifically and their cycle, there's a female cycle, but then also with an individual, every person, even when we're talking about nutrition generally, comes with a health history. You know, back to when they were a child, you know, what was their diet like then? What's happened to them? Where have they grown up? What's their diet been like then? What's their training history? And actually having an understanding of all of that can all have an impact on where somebody is now. So yeah, there's not a one size fits all approach. You need to kind of do a deep dive with every client you see to find out where they are on their journey and put together a appropriate plan for them to move forward.
I think there's lots of resources which we can link underneath this chat. Obviously, talk about the Stacy Sims stuff, or TED Talks, as well as some of the papers you mentioned, as well as Renee, and obviously the work that you obviously do, being part of the partnership that we work with. I think it's really important, first of all, to have this conversation about the differences, because there are some. It's almost blatantly obvious that there is such a difference, but as you said, all the research has always been done historically on males, and you could not find two different, you know, sets or different parameters and different hormonal balances. Anyone who knows a guy knows that they're just wired differently. Anyone who knows a woman knows they're also wired differently. So why would that not be the same from a fundamental hormonal point of view, and the way in which you would feel for performance? So it's definitely made me, in this last 2 or 3 months, really, really think about what my part in this is. And to be honest with you, I'm still trying to get my head around it. And I think also the athletes that we're working with as well, and you're working alongside us with this, is that everyone's learning at the same time. And there is a little bit of experimentation with what food you would eat and how you would do it. And to be honest with you, the majority of them have been really, really receptive of it, which is it's precedence for the way in which you work with these people. And it's great to have you as part of that. But for now, I think it's more about the awareness of this and giving people answers, because as we said at the top of this, there'll be people scratching their heads as why did I feel really good yesterday and I feel rubbish today because I hardly did anything, or I've had 4 days off, I feel awesome. It could be an obvious reason for that, but it's a very, very individualized thing. It's the same as when you have a run into an event. It's never everyone's not got the same run in. You don't have like 3 days off and just go race. You don't have a specific warm-up a generic warm-up that everyone does. It's got to be very, very individualized. And this really, really cries out to me how much more individualized training and the approach to how athlete and coaches work from the female point of view. So it's been really, really interesting from my point. And this has definitely been a subject that a lot of people have been asking me about. And like I say, the work you've done with athletes that we've currently passed your ways has been brilliant across the board. The females specifically, they've really gained a lot from it, as well as a few of the guys that we've got working with you as well. But as we kind of try and wrap this up, Sarah, is there anything else that we kind of need to add to what we chatted about? Is there anything that we've kind of missed?
Yeah, so probably, I mean, it might be useful, I could write something up, or was, you know, when we're talking about that, well, understanding why do I feel that way today is the main thing I would, as females to take away, would be to make sure that you, if you're having a natural cycle, that I would encourage you to track that in line with your training. So whether you use Training Peaks or whatever method you use, a diary or journal or whatever, would be to track how you feel at each point in your cycle. And maybe I could just quickly summarize how that works.
Yeah, I mean, we can put it out on our socials. We can link it to this once you've done it, and we can put it on our website and stuff like that. So that would be just a very simple resource for people to kind of almost introduce them to the concept and the subject.
Well, it's basically, I mean, it's breaking down that 28 days. So on day 1 is the first day of your period. That's the first day of your cycle. That's the start of your follicular phase. And that's generally, at that point, you're probably going to be feeling pretty lousy because you've got low iron. Your estrogen and your progesterone are going to be low. And at that point, you know, sleep and carbohydrates is really important. Phase 2, so that's kind of day 8 to day 14, you're still in the follicular phase, but you're coming up to ovulation. So at that point, that's when your estrogen's starting to rise. And for a coach, at that point, that's when your athlete's going to be feeling, most likely going to be feeling at their best, because when you're at that point in your cycle, you can more easily tap into using fat for fuel. So that's why, you know, that's the time in that month when you maybe want to be getting in your big sessions, and, you know, the heavy training block at that time. As you get further into your cycle, which is the luteal phase, that's when your progesterone and your estrogen are still rising. Towards the end, they're dropping. And that's then at that point when carbohydrate becomes really important, because you need to use that for fuel rather than fat. And that's when endurance is it's a better time to be doing lots of long, slow stuff, but not high intensity. Okay. So that's a very quick summary, but you can start to understand as a female, if you're like, okay, well, I'm 10 days into my cycle, now's the week for me to do, you know, to do some more hill reps or interval based training or sweet spot work rather than the zone 2 stuff. So yeah, that's for those with a natural cycle, that would be a good summary. For those that are on the oral contraceptive pill, which I'd imagine lots of people are, I would just be encouraging people to be more in tune with the other symptoms that I was talking about that are going on with their body. So their immune system, their sleep, their digestion, and really tuning into what's going on there, because when things start to go awry, that's when it might be worth speaking to somebody like me.
Yeah, perfect, Sarah. I mean, for me as well, the fact that, which is it's not a great thing, but the majority of coaching and sport is pretty heavily male dominated. And the more that male coaches can get in tune with this, I think it's going to be nothing but a fantastic asset to just understanding what's actually going on with your athletes. And it's not literally, it's just that thing that happens. I think having a real understanding and realizing that there's a bit more to it. In fact, there's a lot more to it, not a bit, let's not kid on here. There's a lot more to it than just simply they're having, it's the girls' period. It's simple as that. And this over long term can obviously have a massive effect on the psychological side of things as well. It just needs a bad timing or something that happened at, you know, the perfect race, or, you know, you've been building up for months and then something doesn't quite go the way it should. But over that time, you and your coach should have had that relationship where you've worked it out in the run into your event, so that you can do as many things as you can to help, you know, put you on the front foot, so that you're preventing it rather than trying to cure it ultimately.
Yeah, well, you can't. Yeah, it's going to be. You could plan all of your races so that every race that you do lands when you're in that week of your cycle. It's going to be very difficult to do that. So then it's exactly as you say. It's like, well, if you know that, if you're tracking and oh, that 70.3 that I'm doing is going to land when I'm on day 20 of my cycle, carbohydrates are going to be essential, even if I've done, if I've been doing lots of fasted training, zone 2 training, that sort of thing. You need to actually be getting your system used to using carbohydrates for fuel, because, well, you should be in that kind of race anyway. But at that point, that's when you're going to need a little bit more, and the before, during and after. So just having that knowledge, I think, is going to help people a lot.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot of food for thought, and we have touched on a heck of a lot of information, which is probably
overwhelmed everyone.
Holy, but there'll be lots of light bulb moments for people who are watching this, and not only from the people, the female athletes who are paying attention to this, from the coaching side as well, and even for significant others whose wife, spouse, whatever it is, their daughter or whatever, it's going to affect everyone, and this could be just exactly what is needed for people to be more aware of what actually happening and to help each other more than anything. But Sarah, it's again, you've done it again. You've absolutely blew my mind with so much information. I look forward to getting those bits off you. Send me those links and we'll get it all put in this description. And of course, if you have got spare 5-10 hours to write a little bit for us, that would be brilliant as well, and we'll get it out there. I'll definitely send it to all the female athletes that we work with, and obviously we'll put it on the Meta website as well as on our social medias. But for now, Sarah, I must thank you once again for your time. It's been an absolute blast having you on, so thank you once again
for having me.
No problem, and have a great weekend when it comes. All right.
Yeah, you too. Cheers, Jimmy.
Thanks. Take care.